So thanks for attending. Before we start, like I said, I'm going to be recording this. If you don't want your face to appear on the webinar, it won't. I'm only going to put my own face in the corner, so everybody else's won't be there. So don't worry about that. But my name is Pete Morton. For introductions, I think I know most of you on here right now, but I'm a former U.S. Army intelligence officer and current security consultant. I've been working in the field for about 20 years now. Worked with large companies like Morton, Amazon, General Dynamics, but my bread and butter over the past few years has been working with smaller and mid-sized companies, nonprofits, and humanitarian organizations, which present challenges that are not often remedied through money. So I find myself in high-risk locations with access to typical communications platforms like cell phones, sat phones, because I don't have the money to get costly encrypted devices or apps. I had to get pretty good at understanding how bad actors target communications and different cost-effective ways to mitigate the risk. I've worked for quite a few years actually exploiting communication devices while working counter-narcotics and in the military. That included forensic examination of cell phones as well as managing some T3 wiretaps for law enforcement. I'm not a signals intelligence expert, but that experience gave me enough knowledge to mitigate the threat and to be able to operate in a relatively secure manner in some of these high-risk locations. So I wanted to share with you some of my go-to platforms that I use, as well as the ability to measure the risk and mitigate it the best you can. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as they come up. I'll do my best to integrate the answers into the presentation. What we're going to go through today is your target size. It's probably the most important thing to identify when it comes to secure communications is like, who are you? Types of secure communication that you can use, how to secure your devices, the most secure chat applications that I know of, and then secure backup communications and some of the more common breach tactics that are used out there today, which could change by tomorrow, by the way. So target size. Like I said, this is the most important thing. I get a lot of people coming to me. It's like, oh, are they tracking my phone or who's listening to my conversations? And then it's like, it always comes back to, well, who are you? What are you doing? In order to understand how someone or an organization might target your communications, you have to understand your target size. Are you really that big of a deal? Are you a threat to a government entity, or do you have something of significant value that might motivate someone to target your communications? Typically, we're not targeted through the use of signals intelligence only, regardless of if you're being targeted by an unfriendly government or criminals. Multiple sensors are used. So you might be targeted because of somebody you met for lunch. Maybe they're being surveilled. Somebody saw you with them and they want to know who you are. Maybe a social media post that you put out there is an indicator that somebody wants to look further into who you are. Maybe your appearance or the perception of wealth while you're traveling in a foreign country is the cause of somebody targeting you, or maybe you just pissed off the wrong person and they decided to fixate on you. There's a lot of different reasons. But you have to identify those things. Targeting, at least on the government side of things, it's not an easy process. It entails hours and hours of work to collect on indicators from numerous intelligence disciplines. So trying to track somebody via a cell phone only, it's not typical for targeting. Although they're becoming quite the sensor with all sorts of different ways that you can track somebody, it's not usually the only thing that somebody's looking at if you're being specifically targeted. That's why most of the issues people face when it comes to signal breaches revolve around being a target of opportunity. Going through a choke point like customs at an airport or a checkpoint, or losing or being robbed of your phone. Those are the typical things where these breaches are happening. It's not from somebody hacking. So there's a few questions you need to ask yourself before you start operating in a high-risk environment. The first is, what are you doing there? Are you working with a high-value individual? Do they have a huge presence that people are going to want to know? That if I want to go after somebody and I want to know more about them, I typically look at who they're with. I look at their executive assistants. I look at their drivers, people who have access to them on a consistent basis for hours. Those are the people I'm going to target because their security posture is probably not going to be as high as the actual individual themselves. But where are you? Well, let me go back to that too. Not just your high values. Let's say you're a faith-based group, because I know we have some people here who operate in that space, and say you're going into a closed country somewhere where they don't want you to proselytize. If you go in there and people know what you're doing, it's going to increase your target size, regardless of how much money you have. Where are you going? Of course, that's a huge thing. Is what country you're in, what cities you're operating in, what neighborhoods, is there high crime rates? Is there the infrastructure to support targeting you specifically? Do they have law enforcement or the means to actually go after you and target your signal? That's a difficult thing to do. Like I said, it takes infrastructure, it takes experience, training in order to do that. So where are you? Who are you with? And who are you? specifically? Are you the executive? Are you the center of gravity? Are you managing a project where everything comes through you, where you have access to all the information? Or are you working with somebody who does? It all comes down to your access to information, really, your access to finances and things like that when it comes to monetarily motivated targeting. But who are you working with? What's the time frame you're working in? Are you there during an election period where there's more security, where there's more assets working that could target you? Are you working during a time where organizations are building up in an area, where economic growth is happening? And what is the time frame that you're there? Are you there for a short period of time? Are you there for a long period of time? Are people going to have more the ability to develop patterns on what you're doing and your communications while you're there? And then why are you concerned? I typically tell people, listen to your gut. If you feel like something's wrong, look at it, identify it, say, okay, this isn't a concern, or mitigate it. The reason I'm doing this in the first place is because I get so many people who are asking me, what are the chances? A lot of this came out of Ukraine recently. Oh, they're tracking my phone. It's like you and 15,000 other Americans who are traveling and doing humanitarian work and things like that in Ukraine. Yeah, they're tracking your phone. It's what is the concern? What is your target size? Why are they likely to look at you? All right, next. Types of secure comms. So there's a lot of different types of secure communication platforms and devices available on the market. Some of them rival the encryption capability that's used by three-letter agencies and militaries all over the world, but they definitely come at a cost. Types of encryption methods are typically broken down into 3 categories: symmetric, asymmetric, and hashing. We're not going to get into any of that today because that would take a good 4 to 5 hours to do. But each has its use depending on the threat level you identify. But basically, encryption uses a key for encrypting and unencrypting data. Encrypts it on one end, unencrypts it on the other, so that in transit, people can't intercept that information and unscramble it without having a key. But nothing is 100% secure. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go into how all of it works, but just keep that in mind. Nothing is 100% secure. The most common devices you're going to use while traveling and on a daily basis is your cell phone. That's mine. That's my go-to, right? I think we get trapped sometimes by thinking of our phones as a phone when they're really a highly sophisticated computer system that often have more functionality than our laptops or desktops. I definitely keep more critical information on my phone than on my desktop at home. And if I was targeting somebody, I would want their phone rather than their laptop or desktop. I definitely keep more information on that. And developing patterns of life and things like that are easier to do through a cell phone. They're great tools for streamlining processes, reducing time suck, but they're also an information security nightmare. Another common form of communication, at least in the security world, which is what we're talking about here, are push-to-talk handheld devices like Walkie Talkies. They're great for verbal communication at short distances, like traveling in convoys or communicating like on a compound or something. All of our security teams, if we have security on our compounds, use them, but they're rarely encrypted, although many companies claim they are. There's only a few types that actually have true encryption, and they're highly restricted in certain countries, including the United States, where the FCC monitors two-way radio traffic. You have to have certain licenses for certain things, and we'll go into that toward the end of the presentation. The third type is satellite communications. SATCOMs are the most secure. If you're just the average person using a cell phone without any kind of additional encryption than other what comes on your phone, the sat phone is actually going to be more secure. It's on a closed network. It takes a lot to actually get access to that network, but they're the most cumbersome things in the world to use. They're not good for rapid communication. They're not good for process, streamlining and improvement. And they require a line of sight to use. They take long periods of time to connect to a network. And the cost is typically between $1 to $3 a minute. So they're not necessarily the best first choice. So let's talk about the first one there, which is cell phone security. Phone companies have had to really up their game in the past few years, and they have. Most of our phones come with built-in encryption, and our security settings offer us many ways to secure our contacts, applications, or communications from hackers. That being said, there's so many different settings in there. It's very difficult to keep track of them, and sometimes you have to go in to make sure that they are correct, that the settings are correct. To be honest, most of us are not going to be targeted by hackers, but it does happen. For instance, Twitter's CEO, right? His phone was taken over by somebody posing as him. The individual was able to request a new SIM card from his provider that shut down his old SIM card, and then the criminal had access to all of his information. I mean, past texts and anything that was on that SIM, they had access to because they transitioned it over. And then he was locked out of it too. That took some planning and talent to pull off. I hope. If it didn't, that provider needs to be gone. But it did take some actual targeting to do that, to pull that off. But his target size was large, right? It was bound to happen at some point. It's kind of like the celebrities with the nudie pics that are pulled off their phones and shared in the World Wide Web. If you have that size of a target, you can expect that somebody's going to actually take the time, devote assets, and try and get into that information. Will it happen to you, though? It depends. So you need to check your security settings. I mean, if you're operating with some of these higher value individuals, you're somebody that's with them 19 hours out of their 24-hour days, it is likely that somebody will target you eventually, depending on how long you're with that person. So go to your settings, make sure that encryption is set up. I think it's automatic on iPhones, not automatic on Android all the time. So you have to go in and check, set up your secure folders, set up encryption. Your phone does have these options. All of them do. Just need to go in and make sure that the settings are correct. A couple of simple things you can do. One of my favorite things to do, we do a lot of training on this, and something I used to do with people's phones all the time. They think they're being smart by deleting their social media apps. But what they don't do is go into their history on Play Store or App Store and delete that history, or actually log out of their apps. So if I find a phone that doesn't have any applications, social media apps on it, especially if it's 20-something or 30-something, that's a red flag. I'll go in, look in their store, download the app, and often you don't have to re-log in. You just open it back up and you have access to that information. So one of the things I tell people is log out of the app, clear off your history. If you're going to do that, by the way, that's not necessarily the best idea because it is a red flag. If I see that you don't have any social media on your phone, if you're going through customs, or, if I've taken that phone because I've kidnapped you and I want to find out more information, I know what to do, that's a red flag that you're trying to hide something. So I'm going to dig deeper. With social media apps, make sure you log out of them if you're going to do that. If you're going to have a clean phone, just use the web, your web to log into your social media and then log out of it instead of having the application on your phone in the first place. The other thing I tell people, though, is that it's a strong tool. Social media is a great tool. It's like a double-edged sword, right? You can build a persona. You can be whoever you want to be in social media, right? I mean, we have all these people who are just showing the good things in their lives. There is a way you can actually build your own persona out. What I tell people is what you're communicating on your social media can be used to your advantage, or it could really be, created a huge disadvantage and show a pattern of life to whoever's looking at your feed. Just be careful when you post. I use LinkedIn a lot more than I use Facebook, but I do use Facebook every once in a while, but I only post what I want people to see. And then I throw some curveballs in there every once in a while. Not necessarily lying, because once you start lying, then you have to justify those lies. And getting into lying, just being somebody who's done interrogations before, you're gonna trap yourself. A lot of people who operate in faith-based groups, especially operate in closed countries, they think that they can lie. They do lie in customs, or they say they're doing something they're not. Customs let them go through. They think they're scot-free, but what they're really doing is saying, okay, this person's a red flag. We're going to start following this person, find out what they're doing, and then you end up identifying all your partners that you're trying to help doing whatever you're doing on the faith-based side, and you think that you're scot-free. You actually, there's a weight lifted typically with people when they do that, and they operate even more freely than they would have if they were trying to be careful, if they were concerned about it. Social media is a great tool. I have a whole class on that one in particular that I can go through with people if they want to learn more on it. But the biggest thing about it being on your phone is it creates a pattern of life. I know where you go. I know who you talk to. Your messenger apps typically aren't, you're not deleting the messages on there. That's why I tell people never communicate on Facebook Messenger. Use a secure app, which we'll get into in a minute. That information is not encrypted and secure. And I can go back through it and just find out all sorts of information on you. The other thing is your Bluetooth. I always turn mine off unless, and like I said, it goes back to your target size. What are you doing? If I'm on the airplane and I want to listen on my headphones or something like that, it's a different story. If I'm working in an environment, or I'm out having a conversation with somebody in a restaurant or something like that, that Bluetooth's going off. I'm not going to use it. I actually take even greater steps when it comes to conversations that I have with people that I don't want anybody to listen to. But your Bluetooth is a way that people can get in. Make sure you have it set up to where a pairing request with authentication is required to connect to your Bluetooth. VPN, I always use ExpressVPN no matter where I go, even in the United States, where I'm connecting to a public Wi-Fi system. That is the most vulnerable that you can possibly be. Hotels are the worst. I was working with an organization. They were a faith-based group, but they were doing some stuff in Ukraine, and they had a code name for the people that would actually go in to the war zone to try and set up operations. And so I was at a hotel in Ternopil, And I went on to connect to the internet through my VPN, and I see their code name. They're using their code name for their Wi-Fi, their Wi-Fi network identifier on their computer. So it's like you can identify those different things. That was just like a random thing, but I was like, oh God, come on, guys, let's be a little smarter than that. VPN's great. Even if you can't identify that, you're not going to know where I'm VPNing in from. Typically I'll choose a location in Europe. If I'm in Europe, that's outside of where I'm at, or you can pick different locations that you want to VPN into, and use your virtual private network. I want to make sure everybody understands I am not an IT guy. This class is for people who are not IT people. So I don't know all the specifics. All right. But I do know VPN is a great way to mask your IP. They can't tell where you're at, which is a big deal, right? The metadata that you can get from somebody can be used to identify locations and who they're talking to and how long you're on. But use a VPN if you can. It's not that much, it's like $10 a month with ExpressVPN. And it's not something you have to plug in or anything like that. You can put it onto your phone. Then again, it goes back, like I said, to your target size. But most of the time when it comes to those open networks, you have what's called wargaming going on, where people are kind of they're just looking for opportunities for people that they can exploit, for networks they can exploit to get information, because that information is actually valuable. You can buy all sorts of it on the dark net. Turn your phone off or on airplane mode when you're not using it. I unfortunately cannot turn my phone off. I'm on emergency call all the time. I have to have my phone on. But there's times when I'm having conversations and I've done enough government work, and even 10, 15 years ago, capabilities were being developed where it didn't matter if that phone was on or not. I can't tell you specifically. I can't get into any of the information that I might know or might not know, but I'm going to tell you that I take my phone and either lock it up or I give it to a trusted colleague when I'm going into a meeting where I don't want anybody to listen to, period. No exceptions, even if it's off. I don't want that phone with me. I just trust Chuck on this. I don't know if you guys ever watched Chuck, but it's a great show, and all the capabilities they have in there came true, and they were developing those capabilities 15 years ago. I can't imagine what those capabilities are like now. So I just leave it out of the meeting. It's not worth having it there. I don't need it. You can do things like tape, your microphone and camera with special tape. It's still not a good enough mitigation when it comes to critical conversations where there's proprietary information or scheduling information being shared. Just remember your target size when it comes to your phone. Let's talk about platforms. I'm going to tell you guys what you probably already know, but Signal is currently the most secure. Like I said, nothing's 100% secure, but they've done a lot. They've had a lot of audits. They've had to go to court and all sorts of different things. But the biggest thing with them is that their code's open source and that they're a nonprofit. I mean, I know a lot of nonprofits that pay their directors millions and millions of dollars, but there's not a profit. There's no shareholders to worry about. The motivation to use that information is not there. So that's probably one of the best things about them. They have great encryption. Most of these platforms have end-to-end encryption. That means that even the organization cannot view the text. And that's been tested and verified on all of them, WhatsApp, Signal, anything that says that they have end-to-end encryption. The issue isn't the information being communicated, but the metadata attached to that. What I used to do a lot of was take that metadata, sift through it, look for locations, look for times, look for dates, who they're communicating with. The one thing Signal does require, most of them do require, is your phone number and your contact list in order to access, right? WhatsApp requires that you have that person in your contacts, which means they have access to your contacts. It's the metadata that you have to worry about that can be used along with a bunch of other sensors to create patterns of life and identify what you're doing. That goes back again, like I said, to targeting. Is somebody targeting you specifically? They're not typically just going to use signal intelligence. They're going to use a bunch of different ints to target you. But it is a way to open up Pandora's box and have somebody start looking at other things and determining whether they want to look closer at you. Signals collects very little metadata. I think they checked the last time you logged in. I don't think they keep track of times. And of course, your phone number is there with it. They have disappearing messages. A lot of times with deleting messages and disappearing messages, there's still some data left over that shows that you were doing that. So if I do get a hold of your phone and I'm looking at your Signal and I see a bunch of disappearing or deleted messages, I'm going to wonder why. And then it's just going to open up, more questions. But it's still better than having that entire thing, listed out. How much information are you voluntarily putting onto this device that is vulnerable no matter what we do? So you got to be careful about how you communicate things. I like to do face-to-face conversations a lot. That's just the best way to do things. But there's some creative ways that you can get around having to transmit that information and somebody finding it. It is not hosted on their own servers. They're on AWS servers. That being said, AWS and Azure have some of the most secure servers in the world. No matter what anybody says, yes, there's been some hacking and things like that have gone on in the past. That's bound to happen when you have two organizations that manage most of the world's data, right? Microsoft and Amazon. I do know from working for a few of those companies that their security is extreme. I'm not as concerned about that, but it is the most secure that you can use now. I would recommend if you do anything in hostile environment when it comes to text or video or voice, that you use Signal. The next is Telegram. I always had my doubts about Telegram from the very beginning, just because of the way it was set up and who set it up. I'd say more people are using Telegram right now, but I will tell you this. It is more functional than Signal. You create channels and all these different things. You can use bots to do automatic replies and whatnot. You can create your own bots. There's a few things on this that are red flags. There are encryption concerns that have not been audited. Their servers are hosted in the UAE, which is a monarchy and does not respect your privacy. I'm going to almost guarantee that they have access to those servers, and that's the only way that they're able to actually maintain them in the UAE. Their group chats, text or voice, are not encrypted. They're not end-to-end encrypted. So we're all a part of these feeds, right? And see the Russian feeds and telling everybody everything. Those messages are not encrypted and they can access them. So anytime you're in a group in Telegram and you're texting, they're not end-to-end encryption. It's only when you're actually in a secret chat that you've identified as a secret chat that it's actually encrypted. So you have to make sure you're doing that if you're communicating in Telegram. They collect a lot of metadata. There's no group video chats functionality side. They require your phone number to register. There's too many concerns for me to be on that for anything other than getting information. I will go onto the groups that are sharing a wealth of information, especially when I'm in Ukraine. If I want to know where something's going on, the Russians tell me. So it's just there. But I will not communicate back and forth with clients or anything like that on Telegram. It's an off-limits platform for me. Unfortunately, a lot of my friends are stuck on it, I think, because of the functionality of it and some different trust issues, especially my friends in former Soviet countries. But Signal is the way to go. One called Threema. I don't know if you've heard of Threema before. It's smaller. It's not as well known. But if you're setting up a network internally with your organization and you can afford $3 the one-time fee, this is the way to go. They don't require your phone number. They don't require your email. You can pay via Bitcoin. So they don't require any information really to set this up. But the functionality is a little bit less. They have their own servers in Switzerland, very much like Proton Mail. So they maintain their own servers. They're very, very focused on privacy. But because of the $3, I think their client base is a lot smaller. And so when you have a smaller client base, Telegram has like 50 million users. I think these guys have like 5 or 6 million. That can be a turnoff, I guess, to some people. For me, that's a better sign, honestly. If I want to set up a network where we only are communicating with each other and everybody is on the same page, I'll probably do it through these guys and stay away from the other, well-known ones. Biggest concern with this is, are they going to last because of the smaller, group using it? But because they charge that's probably why they charge the $3 one-time fee, is so that they can make it through. Most tech companies don't make money the first 10 years. They got to get past their round A funding and round B, and then hopefully they're self-sufficient after that. But these guys have been around for a little while now, so I think they will have some staying power and be around for a little bit longer. Next app, the one I don't want to use, but everybody else wants to use it, and I have no choice. WhatsApp is not secure. Yes, the messages are secure, but like I said, I don't need to see your text messages to develop a pattern of life and find out what you're doing. I'm going to use multiple sensors. I'm not just going to use your phone. I would recommend not using WhatsApp. They do have end-to-end encryption, self-destructing messages, images, things like that, but it requires your phone number and your contact list. Why do they need your contact list? Why couldn't they create it to where they don't need access to your contacts? They're using that data, whether it's for marketing research or whatever, and sharing it with Facebook. I don't know. That's why it's important to read through privacy policies and use policies. It is not secure. There have been a lot of accusations of vulnerability on their cloud-based things, especially with iCloud. I want people to take into consideration is all of these companies still have to cooperate with the governments where they work. In the United States, when I wanted to put up a T3 on somebody's phone, I got a warrant. They put a drop line in. Nobody knew about it. I had to talk to the company. The company said, I said, hey, I have a warrant for this. You got to do this. They do it. Nobody knows about it. I'm listening to conversations. It's not difficult. And the justification behind it wasn't difficult. That was in the United States where privacy is kind of up there, right? If you're operating in countries where the government actually has vested interest in those companies or is, part of those companies, there's a lot of countries out there, they don't need warrants to get the information. They just get the information. If they want to get into your information and tap your phone, they can. Everybody's concerned about email or text, but if I want to tap your phone, I can tap your phone. There's no encryption. That doesn't matter. I just talk to the provider. They give me access. Something to think about wherever you're operating, whatever country you're operating in, the target size increases greatly when you're in certain countries where the government is the private company as well. WhatsApp, I would stay away from, honestly, as much as you can. I know we all have to do business, though, and our clients are going to do what they're going to do. So like I say, it goes back to what are you communicating on that platform? How much information are you giving them? It's like, hey, I need to talk to you about something. Let's move over here. I'm not going to talk to you about it on WhatsApp. Walkie Talkies. Let's talk about those. Walkie Talkies are not encrypted. There are like two that are. A lot of us use them, especially in areas where there's no cell service. Sat phones, of course, like I said, are cumbersome. They lose connection all the time. It's not something you can have a back and forth conversation on. So a lot of times people go to the handheld. Goes back to your target size. If you're in a moving convoy or something like that, you're not likely to be. It's going to be harder to pick up your conversation because you're moving and they have limited range. But if you're operating on a compound and you have a bunch of security guards that have those devices and they're communicating when somebody's moving from here to there, I guarantee you somebody can easily pick that up. They operate off what's called squelch. Squelch, like there's 50 different tones or whatever. It's not true encryption. It's a tone that unlocks the other side. You can still hear somebody's conversation if you really wanted to. There's the GMRS radios, HF, VHF radios. Most of them are not encrypted. There is one that you can use. It's called an FHSS walkie-talkie. It's frequency hop spectrum spreading. Okay. As far as I know, there's only one company that really sells them out there. It's Motorola. You can buy them on Amazon. Those are the only ones that actually have an encryption that can be operated. The problem isn't the encryption, it's the FCC in the United States, at least. FCC monitors all push to talk. And so they don't want like somebody's using it like there's a family network where you can go out, you're backpacking, you can talk back and forth to people, no problems, you're not breaking any rules. But if you start doing emergency communication outside of a family emergency while you're backpacking or something like that, the FCC is going to pick up on it and they're going to fine you for it. It's like that in most of the countries. They want to regulate who's using these different networks that are set up. This FHSS is on it's like the 900 megahertz or something like that, or 900 frequency band, where it's legal to use, you're not breaking any laws, and you can encrypt conversations. If you have to use push to talk, I would highly recommend using FHSS. Everything else is not encrypted. It's not secure. Used to love it in the military, walking through the mountains in Afghanistan, because you pick up their talk, but guess what they're picking up? They're picking up our chatter on our walkabouts too. So you can pick up chatter and use it to, like I said, it's more of a target of opportunity situation. It's not a targeting situation. But if somebody did want to target your two-way radios, if you're on a compound, you're stationary, they can. If you're communicating information like the principal is going to the elevator right now to meet his car at the front door, you're giving away quite a bit of information on those walkie-talkies. I typically don't use them unless I absolutely have to, but I will tell you in Ukraine right now, I have a lot of people that we gave out satellite phones to use in a case of emergency that are using only those phones now in Kherson, because Kherson switched their whole network over to a Russian cell network. So nobody wants to use those cell networks. Satellite communications, like I said, probably the most secure. It's the hardest to get access to. The companies, they're closed. Iridium, you have your Iridium network and Threema network. Typically, they're more difficult to get permission from to listen to conversations. So somebody giving you access to their satellite network is a big deal. But they're cumbersome. They're emergency comms only. They're costly. You're not having a lot of back and forth on there because you're going to lose comms as soon as that satellite goes over the horizon if there's not another one there. And it takes like 30 minutes to pick up a satellite. So it's definitely, even in emergency situations, it's cumbersome and slow. It's for when you don't have cell network and you absolutely have no other choice. You use that SATCOM. I keep a sat phone with me. I traveled with sat phones for the last 7 years, and I've only used them to test. Even some of the countries that are more austere and just like out there in the middle of nowhere, they're all getting cell networks. It's costly. I still have to pay annual fees to keep it going, but it is an emergency communications for when you don't have cell service. I think I'll probably use it more likely when I'm backpacking than when I'm actually in a foreign country operating. But there are, I would recommend Iridium Extreme. That's my go-to phone, but it's about $2,000 right now. It keeps going up because I think they're in demand because of war zones and things like that right now. The other one you can use, though, if you're operating outside the United States, in Europe or the Middle East and Africa, is Threema. They're still a good company. They still respect your privacy. They don't want to lose customers, so they're a good one to go to. But their phones are only like $700. You can actually get it's a Threema Lite. It has Arabic writing on it and the regular numbers, and actually drives the price down for some odd reason to like $700. So it's actually not a bad one to go to if you're on a budget. But they're not ruggedized. Look like this. They're the smallest phone out there, and it could definitely, if I drop this thing, it's probably going to break. Let's talk about common tactics real quick. Like I said, you're more likely to be a target of opportunity if somebody's getting into your phone. It's a forced login, which has happened to me in customs. I recommend to everybody, don't use biometrics, because I'd rather not have somebody force my hand onto my phone. If they're going to force me to open it, I'll just give them the code. So I keep everything when I travel, it's under a code or a password protected. It's not biometrics. The other thing I would want somebody to figure out is to cut my thumb off, right? To get into my phone. You think it's crazy? It's happened before. So not to me personally, but it has happened before. So I recommend using a coded password for your phone, no biometrics. But it has happened, forced logins. And then what I used to do a lot of was download phones using Cellbrite, different technology like that. They bring me a bag full of phones, plug them in. As long as they weren't password protected, I was able to get most of the information. And even the password protected ones, I was still able to get metadata out of. I'm always concerned when I go to certain airports and they take my phones and my laptop and go behind closed doors with it, because I have a feeling of what's going on. That's another reason to make sure that you're logging out of things. You're not keeping things stored on your platforms. Try and keep them in the cloud if you can, because people can get into your devices when you're going through some of these choke points and access your information. And it might not be for anything other than a lot of times it's random. I always randomly get checked in certain countries. But it could be just a random check that they're looking at that information. But you want to make sure that you don't have anything really critical stored on those devices. Store it in the cloud, log out. They can't get to it that way. That means logging out of your password managers as well. It's great that password managers exist. I have like hundreds of passwords. I couldn't, survive without it. But if somebody gets that one password to log in your password manager, they have access to everything. So make sure you log out of that as well. Downloading cell phones, like I said, that was a common thing. Hey, we're having a meeting. Everybody put your phones in this bag. We'll protect them for you. And guess what we're doing with them? We're downloading as much as we can off of those phones. So you got to be careful who you give your phone to. You can still download. And it's even easier now to download the information than it used to be. You used to have a platform or a device to actually do that. Now you just need a laptop and the right software. Like I said, government cooperation. Where are you operating? Sometimes those government sensors are sitting right next to the people who are providing your services. Everybody's like, well, I get a SIM card where I go. It's like, okay, what company are you using for that SIM card? What information are they collecting from you when you have to register that SIM card and start using it? Is it a reputable company? Most of the time, no. They're just these small fly-by-night companies that hand out SIM cards for you to use in your phone. Make sure you're doing your due diligence on who you're using. Make sure what you're communicating. Like I said, that's more important than what platform you're using. Even the Walkie Talkies. If I'm driving with somebody and I'm concerned about somebody listening to my conversation on a walkie talkie, it's like, hey, I need to use the bathroom, stop at the next gas station. We have a face-to-face conversation. It's not, I don't need to give you all the details over that platform. We talked about metadata already. I can use that to create patterns of life. And then I start using other sensors to target you, not your phone. And then wiretaps, we talked about those already. Just understand wiretapping is a tedious, painful process. Usually it's listening to a conversation, looking for one nugget. What you end up getting is a guy who's breaking up with his girlfriend and ends up having conversations 25 times a day with the same girl about the same thing, while you're waiting for that one little nugget, and you have to have somebody listening in to those conversations and transcribing. And it takes hours and teams and tons of assets and tons of money to do. So it's likely not the thing that somebody's going to do unless you are seriously high value, and they have a reason to. Garmin inReach, I wanted to talk about that. They're great for backpacking. They're great for going out on safari. Garmin inReach, they're a satellite device that takes text only, okay? You cannot verbally verify you are talking to the person. A lot of people in Ukraine were using Garmin inReaches. And I was like, don't go through checkpoints, please. And don't get hemmed up at the border. Because the minute I used to do this as a tactic. If I could take a text device, it doesn't have to be a Garmin inReach, take that, use that, lure in. If I get that from a drug dealer, right, or a terrorist, I can use that through text to lure somebody in and hem them up. You have to have some way of verbally verifying that you're talking to that person. So I said, don't waste your money on the inReach if you're going into a high-risk location where you're concerned about that. Hey, I'm stuck in this location. I need somebody to come get me, somebody to come pick me up. I'm in need. It's an emergency, because that's what those are for, right? You don't know who you're talking to on the other line. So you have to have some way of verifying that. Even if you do have that way, if they have that person in custody, they can get that information from them. You got to have a verbal verification. So I just say, get a sat phone. Don't bother with the inReach. Get a sat phone where you can call somebody and talk to them, have a conversation. And so I would recommend just staying away from those inReaches. Anybody have any questions? Anything they want to talk about real quick? We have a few more minutes. Okay, well, I'm going to say thank you. This is what I do for a living. If you are concerned about your security posture or where you're at right now, please reach out. There's so many different platforms out there to choose from, but our information security posture in the physical and protective security realm can really mean the difference between success, failure, or even life and death. And so it's very important. We don't get a lot of focus. We don't get as much focus as the IT sector, when really a lot of these breaches do happen because somebody physically has a device. And they're not hacking it. They're just getting the information off the device. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. The other thing I want to highlight real quick is that we're about to launch a new platform. It's called Predictions. And it is everything that I learned from working some of these larger companies, what's wrong with all the different platforms out there, really, and trying to integrate that into a platform for managing intelligence personnel, where they're located, evacuation plans, transportation, secure transportation, managing vendors, doing third-party assessments, things like that on them, risk analysis, all in one simplified platform. Thanks a lot. If anybody wants to stay on and talk afterwards, feel free to. But I'll be doing another one of these pretty soon, probably on email. So keep an eye out for that too.